I did my undergrad here at Newcastle. I'm now a PhD student at the University of Manchester, and I am obviously brown and Muslim.
I'm Charlotte Maxwell. I finished my degree here in 2015. I was the first president of Mind the Gap, so it's nice to come back. And beyond this, I do all kinds of things in arts, and I change jobs every 10 minutes. Oh, and as you can see, I'm black and I'm a Christian.
I'm Alana. I'm in my third year at Newcastle, and I am Jewish.
I'm Haaris. I'm chairing this panel, which I love because it makes me feel like I'm at Comic-Con. Comic-Con for the mentally ill. I'm British Pakistani and I am Muslim.
Hi, I'm Ahmar. I'm studying sociology here at Newcastle. I'm British Pakistani and I'm also a Muslim.
Hi, I'm Ollie. I'm British Pakistani and I am not a religion. I don't do the religions.
Hello, I'm Ava, and I was a Catholic, now I'm an atheist. Yeah.
Welcome to Atheist Corner.
Yeah, wasn't deliberately segregated, but there we are. Yeah, so like I mentioned, very much keen on audience participation. Last year, this entire panel was full of Q&As from the floor, so that mind I didn't actually prepare any questions in advance, so I'm hoping that we can go straight to the floor. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. And raise your hand at any point, even if we're still speaking, and I know I can sort of go to you as soon as we're finished. Awesome. Empty silence. Brilliant. Well, okay, what I guess we can just do is just start with personal anecdotes, and then if anyone thinks anything, please feel free to ask, like, literally any question. Like, I mean, it's my job to moderate it, but we're all here to talk about our experiences, so don't feel like you're going to be too personal. If we don't answer it, we just won't. But like, if you're coming from an intent to learn, there's very little you can do to be offensive. And we also have barriers here as well, and that's sort of the barrier against offence is what I'm considering to be. But yeah, does anyone want to go first and just talk about their life? Makes sense.
Oh, yeah, I love talking about my life. Yeah, so I am someone who is depressive, and I also have anxiety. And both of those were very recently diagnosed, but I've had depressive episodes since I was 14. And really the struggle for me has been like learning to like open up to my very conservative Pakistani Muslim family about that, because there are a lot of like religious and cultural barriers to understanding problems with mental health. Do I say more stuff about my life? I can do.
If you want, or I don't know. Yeah. Sure.
Nah, I'm good. It's chill.
Yeah. I am a chair, yeah. No, you won't. That's all from you. Thank you, Iqra. Bye-bye.
So I'm kind of a walking advert for all the mental illnesses because I've been diagnosed with most of them incorrectly at points. When I was 17, they were like, there's nothing wrong with you, you're just a moany teenager. Then following that, it was, you don't have any mental illnesses, you have a complex about being mixed race because you believe that you're black, and I'm like, no, I just am black. But now I've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, PTSD, and selective eating disorder, which they've now renamed artificial restrictive food intake disorder. Just call it ARFID.
So I am diagnosed with 4 different mental health conditions. I have anxiety, depression, panic disorder, and OCD. And in terms of religion, having a part in that, so my family are religious Jews, and they really struggle to kind of relate to any mental health problems because of their faith in God and their faith in just believing that as long as you've got your health, which they don't seem to consider mental health in that, as long as you've got your health and you're walking and you're talking and seeing, you're fine. So I've definitely had my challenges when it comes to discussing my mental health disorders with my family.
Hi again. I was diagnosed with PTSD, depression and anxiety. It was a little bit challenging telling that to my mum and my brother, especially just because of the negative stigma around mental health, especially in Asian communities, and it's not really talked about much. My dad doesn't really know, if in all honesty. However, I do still struggle sometimes, just opening up to like family and friends and stuff. So yeah.
So I have depression and social anxiety. I'm not going to talk about anything else. But in terms of me, I've grown up in a Muslim household, so I grew up being like in a Muslim like cultural area and stuff like that. And I think like while my mum had like a depressive episode and ended up in hospital, and religion brought her back, whereas she tried to do that to stop me from getting into a depressive episode, but it kind of worked in the opposite way because, you know, good intentions, bad, you know, reactions, so yeah.
Yeah, I have OCD, generalised anxiety disorder, and depression. Yeah, similar situation. My mum has also been in a psychiatric unit and hospitalised for mental health reasons. And when I was very young, and she lost her faith actually, but it was the kind of thing of I was still young enough, and it had such an impact on me in the 6 years prior that I still carried it on until I was around 18. Yeah, I come from a long family with mental health conditions, and so in that regard it's always been very supportive, but it's a very mixed bag in terms of whether or not religion comes into it. My gran is also mentally ill, and you know, like, she finds faith incredibly helpful, but me and my mum on the other hand have found it detrimental.
Yeah, I mean, I've been all over the shop with my faith, with my connection with faith and my mental illness. I was first diagnosed with OCD when I was like 12, 13, and a lot of my triggers were religious in nature, which I might talk about later if we get around to it. My OCD then sort of spawned off into anxiety, which then spawned off into depression, which then ironically cured a lot of my OCD, because that happened. But yeah, no, I think I often find, I'm curious to know if it's the same for other sort of BAME members of the panel, of sort of growing up in BAME families sort of reduces sort of awareness amongst yourselves. I mean, actually, feel free, the people who aren't BAME, to also sort of pitch in as a comparison, but sort of the difference between growing up in a non-BAME family and a BAME family, and how that sort of brings your awareness of mental health. I mean, did you have to learn from it externally, or was it something that was already talked about, things like that? Because for myself, I didn't even know OCD was a mental illness until years later, because mental illness really wasn't a thing I was talked about. Does anyone want to pitch in there in terms of growing up in a BAME family, in terms of mental health and awareness?
Yeah, I'll pitch in. So I had a strange experience in the general sense, in that, like, my dad was also very anxious and was a depressive. But because my mum just didn't have the tools or the language to be able to deal with that, they never really spoke about it. So he was in therapy for a while, he was on anxiety medication, and when I sort of told my parents for the first time that I was depressed, I was 17, and my mum took it really badly. And after that, me and my mum didn't talk about it for another 4 or 5 years. But after I had that initial conversation, my dad and I used to start talking about it. So we're both insomniacs, and sometimes I'd come downstairs at 3 a.m. and he'd be lying on the sofa watching like old Punjabi movies. And yeah, so we'd sit there, and like, it was really strange because we wouldn't have these conversations unless it was in the middle of the night. And I'd come down for like a cup of tea or whatever, and he'd be like, oh, well, while you're there, like, can you make me a snack and a cup of tea? And we would sit there, and he would talk about being anxious and being depressed, and the various points in his life at which when he'd felt like that. And that's where my awareness of mental health issues came from, and like the beginning of my own acceptance of them. Up until that point, I don't think I'd really realised that people from the South Asian community could be depressed or could be anxious. And my dad was really open about it, but only at like certain points. We never spoke about it in front of my mum, we never spoke about it in front of my siblings, and I never really heard about it anywhere else. So
Yeah, I think
my
similar
experience.
to that, when my mom was in hospital, like, it wasn't spoken about. It was like, oh, she's in hospital, not like, oh, she's mentally ill, so she had to go and get treatment and be okay. We never spoke about the mental illness. It was more like, oh, she's gone to hospital, she's back now, she's fine. And I think it was more like, you have to cover up the mental illness. It's not a thing. But, you know, the fact that she had to disappear for a while was like a thing that had to be acknowledged. It was kind of hard for, I think, my external, there's relatives that aren't your relatives.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was hard for them to kind of get over the fact that my mum was like in a hospital for mental illness, so it was just like hidden under the carpet. So yeah.
So why do you think that is?
I think it's one of those things where it's like, oh, well, if you have like a life in which you're like physically and financially well, then why on earth are you depressed? What on earth do you have to be depressed about? And I think especially in like immigrant communities where like your parents have moved to a different country to give you a better life, the idea is like, oh, you have it so much better than your family back in Pakistan or whatever country your parents are from, so why on earth are you depressed now? They think it's sort of like a bougie thing that the immigrant children do sometimes. And it's one of those things, because my cousin was like severely depressed after she got married, and it failed horribly because it was an arranged marriage, and it was they just weren't well suited to each other because he was gay. But it was one of those things where because she had been married and now she was considered like, you know, damaged goods, she had like a lot of difficulty dealing with that, and because the source of it was in the community, like that stigmatized her experience even further. So even though she was like incredibly ill and was hospitalized at one point, no one talked to her about it, and no one acknowledged that she was severely ill, which I think is a really, really damaging thing in our community. But there's this whole thing of like sweeping it under the rug and refusing to speak about it, because maybe if you just don't talk about it, it'll go away.
Yeah, I mean, I think my family definitely has sort of opinion, and the more you talk about it, the more prevalent it comes. Like, I think I've definitely heard the phrase being said to me, you hang out with a lot of people who are mentally ill, that won't make things easy for you, as if, you know, somehow mental illness is contagious. I mean, you know, it might be, who knows, next medical revolution, but it's the idea is the more quiet about you keep it, then the less it happens, which is obviously not a thing.
No, I was just going to say that in terms of Iqra's point, really similarly, I lost a lot of my family to the Holocaust, so in my parents' eyes, I have everything that I could ever want in terms of having a roof over my head, food, no one's fighting to evacuate me or anything like that. My grandpa got on the last Kindertransport train from Poland to England, and he was 13 and chased by Nazi soldiers. And he was very lucky to live 91 years. And you know, he met my grandma in England and they settled down. And the rest of my family moved to Israel when it was a declared a state. So in my parents' eyes, because that's such a close generation, it's only my grandpa, they just see it as, you know, you are going to uni, you have friends, you have family that love you, what more could you possibly want in your life? And they never understood that this isn't something I have control over. And if I did, why would I want to feel this way? Why would anyone want to feel anxious and have panic attacks and have rituals in their life all the time? Let me tell you, it's no fun, and I wish I didn't have to go through it, but it is what it is, and I do my best to handle it. But no, I think in terms of that, like, my parents have a very black and white attitude about things. There's no grey areas. It's you're healthy, and therefore there's no reason for you to complain about anything. So it's not something that we ever discuss. I kept it secret for 5 years. I went to the doctors on my own when I was 16, and then I told my family at 18, and they were just like, oh, okay. And haven't spoken about it since. So that's it, really.
Please, yeah. There's a mic coming towards you right now from our mic. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Ron. The question I want to ask you all is, how can we present these issues to our communities? Is it best to write and tell stories or make pamphlets to our own faith or belonging community? Or is it best to do a multi-faith and multi-perspective leaflet or poetry or drama? Which is best, and what are you going to do?
So the question was, how is better to sort of raise awareness of mental health? Is it through your own faith community, or is it through multi-faith community, and in which way?
Yes, if I do a book of poetry, is it best if I do it from within my own faith and then write about my poetry, my community scriptures and histories, or is it better to do as a group of us, writing about mental health and other issues a group of communities?
So,
So I make theatre, I write plays, I act, I direct, I'll produce everything myself because no one wants to give people my age any money. And most of the work that I make with people explores mental illness. And sometimes we'll do it as a general catch-all, but sometimes we focus in on communities where it's not talked about. It's a bit like, as a black woman, you just get stereotyped as angry, and people are like, no, you're just angry. Like, that's what you are. Like, you don't have a mental illness, you're just an angry person. So a group of us made a piece of theatre challenging that in particular, but we made it so it was accessible for everybody. So I think it's kind of, you almost have to try and do both. But it's frustrating that it's our job to educate everybody all the time, which is why, you know, we always end, like, this conference runs so often, because we're never going to run out of people to educate, and we're never going to run out of having to explain to people this is what happens, and everyone on this stage, like, all of their feelings are valid, and so are everybody else's. But it's almost like we get side-capped as, oh, you're the mentally ill lot and you all bunch together, which is probably why we all bunch together and, like, we're having so much fun on this panel.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely interesting you mentioned about using faith communities as a support system, because I definitely think it's important. I mean, well, from my experiences, you know, with Islam and mental illness is, I mentioned this earlier, you know, going through when I was developing OCD and developing depression and anxiety, a lot of those triggers in my OCD were with my faith. So it was whether or not I was practicing my faith properly, whether I was, you know, doing it enough. I mean, like for as an example, when Muslims pray, they have to do ritual ablutions. It's called wuzu, and it's a particular way of washing yourself. For most people, it takes up to 5 minutes. But because my OCD was very much about cleanliness, and because I was so focused on whether I was washing myself to the religious standards, I'd spend 2 hours doing something which should have taken 12 times quicker. And then a couple of years back, I took the time to read into the relationship between Islam and mental illness, and the Quran mentions, you know, mental illnesses quite a lot, and about how it's not your fault and you shouldn't blame yourself a lot for it, and you should take what steps you need to make it easy for you. So you shouldn't have to, you know, if you're thinking, oh, I'm not doing something correctly, don't worry about it. You know, it's not your fault. You're thinking this way, just as long as you're practicing your faith. And when I realized that, it made things so much easier for me. Like, my relationship with my faith is still very hard because it's basically a triggering error for me. Like, me praying is triggering because I feel like I'm not doing it right, which means I avoid it, which I don't really feel happy about. But I felt much more relaxed doing about it since I've learned that my religion actually has, you know, has things about mental health in it. And it would be so much easier if this was taught to me in all of my sort of religious upbringing when I went to mosques and stuff. I don't know how that sort of, if any of that sort of resonates with people of other faiths or backgrounds and stuff, or...
Yeah, I mean, I really sympathise with Haaris. Part of the reason I lost my faith is I also have OCD, and I found the line very difficult to cross, and I just decided it wasn't really worth the hassle. I'm one of the very rare people who actually had CBT and it worked, and so that kind of thing goes against my grain. But yeah, I think it's definitely a kind of thing of you need to communicate to all people. You know, for some people faith really helps, and for some people it really doesn't, and you know, it really doesn't help me and things. But yeah, I think you really do need to, this was so articulate in my head and now it's really not. Yeah, just it is important to focus on faith because obviously it helps people, but it's also very important to also mention that it's not the only path that you can take in terms of handling your mental well-being. Yeah, that was sort of what I wanted to add.
I think on that note, so my whole like mental health like story comes from the fact that I went to go see a chaplain. So like faith in a weird way helped me, but also didn't help me. So I'm not a Christian either, although he always asked if he could pray for me, and I was like, yeah, that's cute. But yeah, it was kind of one of those things that like faith can help, but you need to know where the line is and not to push it and not to, you know, undersell it either. It's kind of like a weird hard line.
Yeah, I mean, my mum, when I was in a few times I've managed to have a conversation with her about my depression, one of the things she said to me a couple of years back, I think she's realised now, but it wasn't the right thing to say to me, but she mentioned how, she went through depressive episodes and she's poured herself into the faith and that helped her. I'm like, well, that's fine. That's, for some people that works and that's a perfectly valid way to treat it. But for other people, it's not enough. And again, that's equally valid. And it doesn't mean your faith is weak at all. And again, it's something which my religion actually teaches me, and I wish I knew it earlier, is about, like it says to you, seek help, through medicine and through, actual medical care. Don't rely on faith alone, because, the religious aspect is that medical care has been put on this world for us to use, so there's no reason to basically, think it's all this sort of, modern science stuff. It's there for us to use, and people shouldn't have to rely on faith alone. I think that is actually a problem with a lot of BAME faith societies, is a lot of conservative people think faith is enough, and it's a point where they completely, prejudice against people going anywhere else. Question?
Go, Migle, go.
Hi there. How to phrase this? Basically, I have always been an atheist, and I actually, during my teenage years, was quite anti-religious and quite hateful. And a big part of that was because people close to me who had had quite serious problems with psychosis and hearing voices had been encouraged by their religious communities to be fearful of that, and that it was the voice of the devil. But as I've sort of moved on and talked to more people, I've learned also there's a lot of people who have found great things by interpreting their problems with mental illness through a religious kind of viewpoint. And I was just wondering, if we've got non-religious people and religious people on the panel, whether your religion actually comes into how you interpret your experience.
So for me, I was brought up in a really strict Catholic household, and when my mental health issues first started becoming visible was when I was 17, 18, and I basically felt ejected from my church. They were just like, you're not praying enough, you're not being a good Christian, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, that's why these things are happening, you don't have enough faith in God. And then when the psychosis started happening, and I've been hospitalised several times, I just felt completely like church doesn't welcome me, I'm not welcoming Christianity, it doesn't care. And it was only when, whilst I was sat in hospital, I was like, I'm going to read the Bible from the beginning to the end in one consecutive go. And then I'm going to sit and read Peter Vardy's The Puzzle of God, because I like that book. And then I sat there and I was like, actually, no, I can work with Christianity, and I do think that God's got my back, I just don't think that church has my back. So I've kind of separated the two, so I kind of have my faith on my own and not with other people.
Yeah, it's a common problem of people being worse than the religion that they're representing.
Just to add on to that point, my mum, when she was going through a lot, she tried to join a religious gathering at the local mosque to try and meet more people and stuff. And she came back after the first session, and I asked her how it went, and she said to me that she didn't like it, and I said why, and she said to me because it felt like they were preaching at me to fear rather than to love. And I find it really sad that people can believe in something just out of pure fear. That's not what faith's about. Faith's about love.
It's really interesting because when me and my mum first started talking about mental health properly, it was after she had a crisis of faith. So my mum is the most religious person in our family. She's the most she's also the most culturally traditional person in our family. And when my dad passed away, it was the first time she'd ever had anything that had really tested her faith. And it was strange because she and my sister are a lot more religious than I am. And that was the point where I started sort of getting more into my faith and praying more, because I felt like it helped with that experience and it helped my grief. But with my mum, she was just in shock. She couldn't believe that God had done that to her because, she'd been such a good Muslim. And I think for a very long time it took her a while to get back to praying 5 times a day and all the rest of it. And it was the first time that she'd had a crisis of faith. And it also came along with the sort of depressive episode that you can expect when your partner's passed away. And there was a point where she sat down and she talked to me, and so we were talking about faith, and we were also talking about being depressed. And she she just stopped and said, well, is this how you feel all the time? And it's really crazy that happened because she had a crisis of faith and because she was very depressed for a while. And we both kind of reconnected with each other and also with our religion, so sometimes we prayed together. And I really appreciate prayer for the fact that it's like a meditative experience. So not only is it something that like takes you away from like the rituals of daily life, it's also something where it's like, okay, you focus on you and your relationship with God for a bit. So, you know, you block out everything else that's going on in your life. You do some basic like cleaning, which is also great for your hygiene. And then you just sort of, for 5 minutes of your day, you push everything else away and you just pray. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think the one thing with Islam as well is that it's very much a religion of intentions. So if you intend to do something good, you're supposed to be rewarded for it, even if you don't get around to doing it. I think that's like a leeway. So it's this idea of like, if you're mentally ill and you can't make it through all these like daily rituals, then it's fine. You have a pass. It's okay. And at the same time, like there's a big focus on not like fasting or going through other like sort of tenets of your faith if you're not up to it. So my dad, when he was on anxiety medication, didn't fast at all during Ramadan, and he wasn't expected to like do it or to make it up or anything like that, because from religion, especially like after my dad passed away, that's one of the things that taught me how to really look after myself. So that's how it's helped me, but I know that not everyone has that experience.
I know that for me, like it was a very religion versus culture kind of thing. Like I did push religion into the culture box. And that really pushed religion into the like, oh, I hate religion. Religion is the worst. And then you realize that quite a lot of the stuff is from the culture. So then you're like, oh, screw the culture. I'm out.
Yeah, I mean, that's just generally a rule of thumb is when you hear crap things about religion, it's often the people who culturally, made religion as a cultural tool, and then you misrepresent a lot of religion in that sense.
Yeah, I agree with that in terms of my family's experience of religion, in the sense of, on my mum's side, the family, they're very devout Catholics, but take that, although my grandpa do go to mass every Sunday and all this, it is their own experience and things, and they do that. Yeah, but for me, I found the hard line of it. I was constantly, with my OCD, was drawing the line between what was acceptable behaviour, in both culturally and religiously, like what's acceptable behaviour and things, and whether or not I was being a good enough Catholic. And quite similar to what you were saying, Haaris, about like, am I praying hard enough? Am I? And yeah, for me, it all came to a head with with me wanting to kill myself and then turning around. And for me, at that point in time, after having prayed my entire life, in the moment where I needed God the most, I was completely alone. And so, but then I found a great amount of empowerment when I did seek the help that I got, that for me, I was empowered that I had done that myself, and that nobody else had done that for me. Not God, not anyone, I had done that. And that really helped me.
Was there, so go to the back first, and then we'll go back to you, Ron.
Awesome. Hi. Is that far enough? That's far enough. This question is predominantly aimed to the BAME members of the panel, but if your faith applies in this situation, feel free. So once you get out the door, once you get past your family or go behind your family, however you end up working to that point, once you get to the GP's office, once you get to therapy, once you get to the hospital, how has being BAME or being of faith, if that applies, impacted your receipt of or your receiving support or healthcare or getting to the point where you can get access to medication? Or if it hasn't, why not?
Well, as I've been hospitalised multiple times, most of the time I've been treated like complete shit. It's very much the case that my behaviour is considered drastically different to the way someone white might behave, and therefore I'm just acting up for the sake of it. It's also happened a lot that it seems to be that I have to present myself in more pain or with more severe self-harming in order to get any help. And when I speak to other black people, they say the same thing, like you have to do more to look like you are in pain. And then there was a study done in the States about how white medical professionals they will offer pain relief to white people faster than people of colour. So there's clearly evidence there. So it's almost like, what do I have to do to myself to get your help? And there's something about that that's very messed up. That you're like, I already feel terrible. I already feel like there's no point in being here anymore. But you're still not recognising that. So now I need to do something else to make you see that. And that's kind of like your journey through the system. And it's that thing of like, you just sit hoping that you'll get a good therapist who accepts how you identify yourself and doesn't write on your notes, think she's black, because there is no thinking being involved, I just am. And then you need someone who accepts that your experience of the world and the different people you engage with means that you can't just follow the whole thing of, oh, well, if you just like tell people when you meet them, it should be fine. And it's like, no, it doesn't work like that in certain cultures, love, it just doesn't. So I think it's just an ongoing battle, really.
So my first experience when I was 17 with a GP was with a South Asian GP. So the area where I live, Cheetham Hill in Manchester, is like the most ethnically diverse place in Britain. But a lot of the local GPs are people of colour, and that really scared me at the time, because I was like, well, you know, there's this added thing of like, this person is from my culture, they sort of have the same stigma around mental health, and this was like, what, almost 7 years ago? So there wasn't a lot of like mental health training for GPs. I think it has gotten better since, but so I went to my GP and I was like, you know, I'm depressed, I want to kill myself, I haven't showered in like 2 weeks. And, you know, in my head, I was like, you know, I'd finally worked up the courage after like 2 years of feeling terrible to finally go to the GP. And he was just terrible. He spent ages sort of flicking through the DMV while I sat there like crying. And then was just like, oh, you know, you're 17. Like, this is probably just hormonal mood swings. And he just completely dismissed me. And that terrified me of ever going to the GP again. Because there's a part of me that's like, what if it's all in my head? I mean, it is technically all in my head, but... So I was terrified, and it wasn't until like things got really bad to the point where it really affected my education. So there was a point in my third year where my course director sent me an email, and he was like, right, we have to meet because you've made it to only 40% of your lectures this semester. And it was because I was dealing with like really bad like sleep patterns and just feeling really horrible and depressed. So I had to go in, and I was like, oh my God, they're going to kick me off my course. And he asked me what was going on, and I had to admit that, like, yeah, I've been having really horrible issues with sleep and anxiety and feeling bad. And he said, well, you know, do you have a diagnosis? Can you get a note from your GP? And I told him that I was terrified of doing that. And so I left it, and then I did so badly that I had to get a dissertation extension because my aunt had also passed away, so there was that going on as well. But I slept through my dissertation hand-in date. I had a massive panic attack, and that was the point where like it really shocked me into like just forcing myself to go back to a GP. And I was terrified that like even after all of that had happened, and I'd like put my degree in jeopardy, like hypothetically, that I still wouldn't get a diagnosis. And I remember having another panic attack in the GP's office, and he was like, right, you're clearly like an anxious and depressed person. Like, let's sort this out. Let's get you on medication. Let's like get you on the waiting list for therapy. And it was something that only took about 20 minutes of my life. But it was amazing because I think sometimes you don't realize that it can be that easy. And since I've moved back home, I have the same GP that I had when I was 17. And he's really, really improved when it comes to mental health. To the point where he actually apologized to me. He was just like, I remember you coming in, and I think I was very dismissive, and I'm sorry. And I was like, well, I have a diagnosis now, so you just need to sign my prescription. But yeah, and I have a few friends who've been to the same GP, and they say he's actually very understanding, and actually now he has this stance where he's like, we don't talk about mental health in the South Asian community, and we really, really should. So I think that's, yeah, it's something that we need to address in terms of training GPs up, especially when they work in like communities of colour, because really they can make all the difference. But it seems to be like very luck of the draw, I think.
Yeah, so sorry, my mind's gone a bit blank. My experience getting help, it's a bit of a weird one because I kept kind of going on and off again with support. So the first time I went to a GP, it was with a black woman who was, you know, she was really nice to me and stuff. But then I don't know, for some reason, like. A lot of the GPs where I live, they're the same ethnicity as me, but for some reason, like when I found out like I had an appointment with a GP who was the same ethnicity as me, it made me more nervous. Just I don't know why. I kind of know why. It's because, you know, the attitude towards mental health in that culture is just so weird, I guess. And, you know, the first time I had an appointment with one of them, it went fine. But then the last time, which is the last time I had a GP appointment in my hometown, period, he literally said to me, I had to get my mum to come with me because I was that nervous. And he said to me that I needed to grow up because I was going to university. So that wasn't the best experience. But I mean, since I've been in Newcastle, the support I've gotten and stuff, it's been pretty good. It's just more so, I guess it's more so on me. Like, I have to make sure that I'm ringing them up. I'm, you know, making sure that I'm keeping on top of things, which is kind of difficult with my mental illnesses. But I'm trying, and I guess that's all that matters.
Yeah, I kind of like the same thing with like, it's like I kind of feel like I feel comfortable speaking to someone who has the same culture as me, just because I have all negative energies of speaking to family and people from my community, and you know, not going anywhere with them. But on the flip side, whilst I feel more comfortable speaking about my life otherwise with someone who isn't from my BAME community, I don't feel I can talk about any of my issues that are particular to my BAME background, because it's like there's so much onus on BAME people. You know, there's so much negative press towards BAME people. You don't want to then complain about your BAME background to someone who's white and be like, yeah, it all sucks, because you know, you kind of be aware that you're meant to be painting in a positive light in a society which already paints us in kind of a negative light. So it's kind of, you don't win either way. I can't speak to someone from a BAME background because I don't feel comfortable, but I can't speak to someone from a white background about my BAME issues because it's like I don't want to talk crap about my own background kind of thing. Let's take one final question from Ron, and then we'll do some closing remarks if you still have a question. Well, you got Mike.
I have a device in my hand, that's useful. The question I'm going to ask you is this. I'd like you each to give a one-sentence reply, okay? Given the time restrictions we have.
So much pressure now.
Religion is my enemy. Religion expects and tells us maybe, that we're not straight enough, we're not happy enough, we're not good enough, we'll never succeed. We always need it. It will always be our master or mistress. It will be in command of our lives. We can never escape it. Are we good enough? Are we man enough, woman enough, gay enough, happy enough? Religion is our enemy. So what would you say to your enemy?
Can I? Sorry. I guess this is a conversation that we had yesterday, the two of us anyway, because for me, despite Judaism having its drawbacks as a result of me being pansexual, for example, so having been with both guys and girls, where, you know, the most orthodox would then view me as an outsider because I'm not following religion, religious practices, blah, blah, blah. And I think for me, what religion has taught me, and it's certainly not my enemy despite it not always going my way, is that at the end of the day, for me, and obviously everyone's different, but for me, The whole point of religion is to teach you to be a good person and love thy neighbour as you love thyself. And it's the whole point is that you're supposed to treat people with respect, and you're supposed to work together to create peace so that everyone can live as happy a life as possible. And no matter where you stand in terms of your branch, whether you're Reform, whether you're Orthodox, in whatever religion, it's your choice, and it's about respecting people's decisions to do whatever they want to do, as long as they are not harming anybody else or themselves as a result. And to me, that's what religion has always, my religion, as being a Jewish girl, that's what it's always taught me. And the people that I've surrounded myself with, the people I'm in contact with, ultimately, that's the main lesson I've learned. And it's what you make of it, it's the way you choose to identify. And it doesn't matter how much, like these guys were saying, how much you do or don't do. Life is about, we're here to all be happy at the end of the day. And that's what counts. And I guess that's what we kind of discussed, is that to me, like, you don't need to view religion as your enemy or your best friend. It's whatever you take from it. Take from multiple, take from none. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you're a nice, decent human being who has a purpose in this world and who does their best for yourself predominantly and other people as and when you can.
Just being aware of time, I'm just going to quickly wrap up. So I would just like to invite everyone to have a closing remark if they want to do so, and then we'll close it there. I'll go guess left to right, unless if you can.
Yeah. And no, just to go on Ron's comment, to wrap up really, I was never straight enough, and so said, fuck it, basically. Also, the reason I wanted to be on this panel was that that there is more than one path to seeking, to being mentally well and things. And although yes, mental health for a lot of people, I've seen it, and I'm absolutely admiral of people who can do it. To have religion help them through that. It's not the only way, and I'm evidence of it not being the only way. I'm almost pretty well recovered now. But yeah.
I think on a similar note, interpretation of religion is more important than the actual, so for example, person A might interpret religion in one way, so saying that gays aren't accepted in the Bible, and then person B will be like, actually that's Leviticus and that doesn't apply anymore, so therefore screw you. So I think it's all about interpretation and what you interpret rather than what someone else has interpreted for you. And I think if you can interpret it yourself and you take away the messages yourself, then it's fine. Religion isn't an enemy. Go crazy. Not too crazy.
I guess I'd just be echoing the sentiments of everyone else here, but I think at the end of the day, look, we're all just here. We're only here once. Let's just make the most of it.
I won't bang on, I promise. I think I completely agree with you. I think ultimately, no matter where you come from, no matter who you are, no matter what you believe, we are all human beings, and that's what we all have in common, and that's it. Hate and all this stuff, what's it for? You only have up to potentially 100 years to live, which in the grand scheme of things is nothing. So make your mark, do what makes you happy, teach people what you want to teach and what's important to you. And that's all anyone can ask of you.
For me, religion isn't the enemy and God's not the enemy. It's people that pick and choose bits of their religion and then spout it as if that's the facts of their holy book. I think for me, they're the enemy, and that's why I won't go in a church.
Yeah, I'm just going to draw from what Ollie said, actually. So I think religion is so broad, all major religions have so many different sects and so many different ways of practicing and interpreting things that, if you're queer or if you're mentally ill or if you're trans or or in any way sort of deviate from whatever we consider the norm in a religious community, there's always like a subset of that community that is there for you. Like, there are some really wonderful inclusive mosques out there, and I think there's always a place for people in religion if they want to be part of it. So I don't think religion is the enemy.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for being on the panel. Thanks everyone for attending. Thank you for your questions as well. The men's panel, men and mental health panel will be in 10 minutes in this area. So hopefully you can all come back and shower us more questions for that. Thank you everyone.